And we will now move to item 16, SB 588. Mr. Pro Tem. As he disconnects from his electronics. Welcome to the President Pro Tem of the Senate.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to be here before the Judiciary Committee here in the California State Assembly. I think this is, correct me if I'm wrong, the first time I'm actually introducing a bill before you as Chair. So I'm honored also to be here with all my colleagues. Good morning to each and every one of you. Mr. Vice Chair, good morning. Mr. Wagner. Thanks.
I'm not sure your colleagues are so happy since you come in, but as due protocol, please present. Good morning.
I think Mr. Pan is happy. He's happy. He's happy. Let it be on the record that he is happy right there. So, Mr. Chair, as well as members, as well as my esteemed colleague, Mr. Pan, thank you so very much for your indulgence. Senate Bill 588 empowers California's Labor Commissioner with additional tools to fight the problem of wage theft in our state. Wage theft takes many forms, including stealing workers' wages by paying less than the minimum wage, shaving hours off workers' paychecks, or failing to pay overtime as required by law. Wage theft is an epidemic. A UCLA study found that Los Angeles County alone, workers have lost more than $1 billion that have been stolen in wages from them each year. And in the report published last month by the Center on Public Policy Initiatives, it found that a survey of 337 restaurant employees, 77% have been victims of wage theft in the last year. That is 1/3 of those surveyed said it happened on a regular basis. Existing labor laws are simply not as effective as they could be. And another study by UCLA Labor Center and the National Employment Law Project, the data showed that 83% of workers who win a wage claim actually never see a single dime. That's a really important statistic to note. 83% of those workers who actually have won a wage claim that has been adjudicated have yet to see a single penny. The wage theft problem is compounded by our economy, which increasingly relies upon low-wage sector jobs and temporary work. Wage theft disproportionately impacts vulnerable workers in our state, including low-wage workers, women, people of color, as well as immigrants. Let me get to the point on this measure right here. SB 588 targets the bad actor employers with strong enforcement options. This means only those employers who have been found guilty of stealing workers' wages, who then refuse to pay what they owe, will face consequences under SB 588. This bill requires a business that has not paid or made arrangements to pay an outstanding judgment against them within. We doubled the number of days working in a collaborative fashion with business. From 10 days, we double it to 20 days of the final decision. They must acquire a wage bond of $150,000. If the business fails to comply, the employer is subject to a stop order and a lien at the Labor Commissioner's discretion. In short, what we have done, Mr. Chair, as well as Mr. Vice Chair and colleagues, we have worked in a very collaborative fashion with all the stakeholders before us. These are the employees, the folks at the lowest economic rung, as well as business. It's been very constructive. It's been very proactive. We're continuing the dialogue on potential other amendments as we move forward. But I want to give a special recognition to you, Mr. Chair. You brought this measure up last year, got to the Senate floor. Little complications, but you helped create the pathway for this measure and this policy that helped create the policy debate here in Sacramento. So I want to give you a special recognition that is well deserved for carrying a heavy load last year. With that, obviously, we have the supporters in favor of the measure, as well as I believe we'll have tweeners or folks who are neutral. With that, Mr. Chair, I certainly ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem. First witness, please.
Hi, my name is Michael Medizian. I'm chairman of the board of Cervicon Systems, a janitorial company based in Culver City, California. I'm here today for two reasons. First, my family built a strong company from hard work and by playing by the rules. And I believe that any person who performs a day's work, they must be paid for that work. Second, I pay legal wages to my employees, and when competitors steal workers' wages, they undercut businesses such as mine. Every day, honest companies struggle to stay in business because they are overrun by competitors who don't pay workers legally and are able to offer clients the same service at a much cheaper cost. Being an honest business owner is not enough to stay in business in industries such as the janitorial industry, and that's why I'm here today. We, the employers and the workers, need to come together to support this bill. This legislation has consequences, as Senator De Leon said, for those who violate the law, and law-breaking companies need to suffer consequences for breaking the law. Enforcement needs to be strengthened. You can have the strongest laws on the books, and California has very strong laws, but unless you have enforcement, those laws will be toothless. So I am encouraged by this bill that it will level the playing field and allow honest companies to compete fairly. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness, please.
Yes, my name is Ellie Wingfield. I'm 20 years old, and I'm a proud member of COP, Children Over Politics. And I'm a security officer. I work 12 to 14 hours, but only get paid for 8. I realized that I got my wage stubs because I used to tally up my scores and see how much money I was supposed to get paid, but I never got that same amount. And I used this money to fend for my family, my brothers and my sisters and my mother and my father, because they need help as well, because they get their wages stolen as well. And on top of that, the money that I get paid for, it helps me get back and forth to school and try to proceed in life and my lifelong dream. So I feel that our parents that get our wages stolen is totally wrong. It's because they spend all this quality time at work instead of at home with their loving children just to get their wages stolen, and I feel that that's not right.
Thank you. Next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Renee Bayardo, SEIU, California, one of the co-sponsors of the bill. We ask for your support.
Thank you. And if the rest of the witnesses in support, if you could give your name, your affiliation.
David Quintana on behalf of the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, in strong support.
Thank you. Other witnesses in support, if you could give your name and your affiliation, please.
Michael Young, California Labor Federation, also here in support.
Thank you.
Mariko Yoshihara with the California Employment Lawyers Association in support.
Children Over Politics, we are the sons and daughters of SEIU union members, and we're also low-wage workers who are trying to organize.
Steven Sepulveda on behalf of the California Immigrant Policy Center in strong support of this bill.
Joseph Villela Huichela, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles, is strong support.
Lilia Garcia Brower with the Maintenance Cooperation Trust Fund, strong support.
Renee Amador with the Wage Justice Center in strong support.
Lima Murtaza on behalf of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Sacramento in strong support.
Thank you. Anyone else in support? And the record will show a vast sea of orange out there that is obviously in support. Thank you. Opposition?
We're actually not opposed.
Tweeners then? Okay,
tweeners
fair.
That the pro tem mentioned. Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. Jennifer Brewer on behalf of the California Chamber of Commerce. And we first want to state for the record that we do not defend wage theft. We think it is awful that an employee is working a full day of hours and has their wages stolen by the employer. And we're not here to defend that. And I'm not here to defend employers who have had an opportunity to be heard by the Labor Commissioner's Office, have a final judgment, and still don't pay their employees what they're owed. So we're not here to defend that, and we appreciate the senator for directing a majority of his bill against bad actors who truly have stolen wages from their employees. And we agree with those provisions and believe that the Labor Commissioner should be given additional tools in order to go after those employers who are denying their employees wages. We have listed concerns over 3 provisions of the bill that we feel need to be amended in order to continue to direct and target this bill against those employers who are truly bad actors. The first is dealing with the provision that requires an employer who fails to pay a final judgment within 20 days, requires them to go and obtain a $150,000 bond if they can't satisfy the final judgment. We are concerned from this perspective when recently talking to surety bond companies, it is almost impossible for an employer to obtain a bond when there's a final judgment outstanding against them. And some bond companies have stated that in order to do that, they would have to either have full collateral for the entire amount of the bond, or they would have to have a co-signer who's willing to put up full collateral for the entire amount of the bond. And if you don't get that bond, obviously the bill has some pretty severe consequences for a business. They stop order, cease operating in California without issuing a final payment on the bond. And what we want to encourage is somebody to pay that final judgment, and they can't pay a final judgment if they're stop order or ceasing operations in California. So we're trying to work with the author's office in order to find a more obtainable amount for the bond, so that you're not putting an employer completely out of business if they can't satisfy the judgment within 20 days but are looking to do that and wanting to do that. So we're working with them on that. The other provision is dealing with personal liability for low-level shift supervisors, managers, et cetera, who may not have the ability to issue payment to the employees, but under the current language of the bill, there's a potential for them to be personally liable for those unpaid wages, which I don't think anybody wants to impose that type of responsibility or liability on those individuals who truly can't issue payment to the employer, force the employer to issue payment. For those who are in direct control of the payment and choose not to, we're happy to work on language to try and address those corporate officers or directors who are using the corporate shell as a way in which to absolve themselves of personal liability. But again, we're concerned right now that the scope of the bill would allow lower level shift managers and supervisors to be held personally liable. And then the last point, the provision that we're working with the author's office on, is the joint employer or joint liability for property services contracts. This bill would impose automatic joint and several liability on a business that contracts for property services, even though they may not have notice of the violations. And so we're seeking to have an opportunity potentially for that business to cure the violations before they're named as a defendant in a labor commissioner complaint or a civil action. We believe that notice to the business is an appropriate measure so that they have an opportunity to resolve the unpaid wages before they're hit with interest, penalties, attorney's fees, etc. A lot of these property services contracts are done outside the view or scope of even the business. They're sometimes done at nighttime when the business operation is closed. And so if they are named in a complaint, that might very well be the first opportunity that that business has knowledge that there's been a violation. So we think they should be given an opportunity to resolve that before hit with a lawsuit. With that, we have those concerns, and we're hopeful that as this bill potentially moves out of the committee, that we'll continue to work with the author and the sponsors to address those three provisions. Thank you.
Very briefly, Mr. Chair, Chris McKaylee on behalf of the Civil Justice Association of California, and we do appreciate the hard work of the Pro Tem and his staff and the sponsor SCIU in trying to resolve these remaining concerns. Not only is wage theft a serious problem that obviously you're familiar with and other members of the committee, but I think the other thing that we're trying to target is the concern over the low collections rate where somebody has been adjudicated as owing monies to employees, and as the Pro Tem indicated in his opening, we really are trying to target these remaining concerns at the true bad actor and not sweep in the good actor. We have shared some potential language with both the sponsor and the Pro Tem's staff, and so we hope that we can add these additional tools to the Labor Commissioner to enhance her authority to deal with those bad actors. And as the bill continues to move along, hopefully we can resolve these remaining concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in opposition?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Javier Gonzalez here on behalf of the California Restaurant Association. We believe workers should be paid for their work. We as an association will have a zero tolerance for wage theft. But as previously presented by previous speakers, we do have some significant concerns with the bill, but we do commend the author for his intent in trying to go after the bad actors. Thank you.
Thank you. Other oppositions? If you could give your name and your affiliation, please.
Good morning. Dane Hutchins with the California Grocers Association. Align our comments with the Chamber. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matthew Harg with the California Business Properties Association in support of the Chamber's concerns on this.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the committee. Mr. Chu.
I want to thank Mr. Pro Tem as well as the coalition that's been working on this issue for moving this forward. This has been a significant issue within my district, and I have heard from hundreds of workers in low-wage industries and immigrant worker communities of the challenges we've had in our locality. Our local laws and our local enforcement have frankly just not been enough to address the situation, and I do think we need some state fixes. I also know this issue has been debated for a number of years, and I think that the changes with this legislation to move toward a post-judgment world rather than a pre-judgment world, to engage a labor commissioner to really vet some of these issues, I think is very appropriate. And with that, I'm happy to support it and also happy to move this bill forward.
So there is a motion and a second. The motion is due pass to appropriations. Mr. Alejo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to commend our Senate President Pro Tem on this bill. Previous versions of this bill, as our chair of this committee did a lot of work on last year's version, and even when I was a member of the Labor and Employment Committee, we authored AB 1386 that gave more power to the Labor Commissioner to be able to impose liens after there was a due process hearing, an administrative hearing. And I think this is an extension of that. The previous concerns were on pre-judgment liens. There was a lot of debate and consternation about that. Last year, there was a concern about a focus on liability just for certain types of businesses. But this bill is much more narrowly tailored, and it's all post an administrative hearing. So it's not a pre-judgment lien, but they've gone to the labor commissioner, somebody's found liable for not paying wages, and this adds a range of enforcement mechanisms to be able to actually collect. And we all know, everyone who's worked in wage and hour law could attest that you could win a claim, but it's only as good as the paper that it's written on when those workers cannot actually enforce it and collect that money. And I personally have worked on many of those cases. But it's also unfair to the businesses that are following the law. It's an unfair business practice when somebody's being a scofflaw, not paying the workers while somebody's complying. That's an unfair business practice in and of itself. And so this is trying to address the bad actors to actually not only comply with the law, but when they violate the law, to have those workers who are entitled to collect their wages to have a meaningful way of doing that. And there's been many different bills that have gone through that have tried to address this, but I think this reaches the right balance, and I think will be an effective tool so many of these workers out here today could actually, if this were to happen to them, have a more effective way of making sure they get that money, and that it's not just a paper or an order on paper, that it's actually meaningful and they'll collect on their judgment. So I'm proud to support it.
Thank you. Thank you,
Mr. Wagner.
I'll be brief, and I suppose I owe it to explain my concerns with the bill and why I don't think I'm going to be there today. I had an opportunity in the district not too terribly long ago to meet with some of the supporters. The case they make is good. The case you make is good for, and your witnesses, that there are scofflaws out there, and nobody supports them. I just don't know that the direction we're taking with this bill is the way to go with it. For example, we heard concerns about the bond. For the life of me, I don't know how the bond works. If you're a bad actor and you've got a judgment out there for a couple $1,000s, because that's what we're usually talking about, according to all of the supporters, and you've got to go get a $150,000 bond, well, you'll pay the judgment. Now, I know that's what you're getting at, but so what's the purpose even of the bond? Why not just say pay the judgment? The concerns about the middle management and the property owners being available, we've unfortunately, I've seen, or at least I think I have seen too often, these sorts of provisions are merely ways for the lawyers to get paid. They're looking for a deep pocket, or they're looking for somebody that's not going to play the shell game, and that's understandable. You want to get the worker paid, but you're visiting liability, I think, on the wrong people. So the mechanisms of this bill to address a serious problem don't seem to me to get to the bad actors as efficiently as we would like. And so I don't think we're there with this bill. So that's why I'm not going to be with it. And if you can lay my concerns, by all means.
Okay, you can address those concerns a little bit later.
Thank you very much.
But we'll move to Ms. Garcia then.
Oh, okay.
I know people have been working on this issue well before we got here, and this is the third time I get to see something like this and a lot of discussion on this item. And I've had an opportunity to sit with the supporters of the bill, and I'm appreciative of the angle we're moving in today, and I'm appreciative of the work you're going to continue to do with the opposition, so I have no problem supporting today's bill as it moves. But I do have a question related to what Mr. Wagner was saying about the bond and just how that works and the full collateral piece, if that's a reality or if that's an exception, and not very often that happens. I mean, just all of that. So we could address that point from the chamber and the opposition specifically. And and in your sentiment about one of the offered amendments about letting the labor commissioner set an appropriate bond amount up to $150,000, if that's a reality, that just creates too much complication. I mean, I would just like a little bit of clarity or thought behind that. Thank you.
All right, we'll do that. Okay. All right. Mr. Chair, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do my close right now, and to the best of my ability.
Okay, because I would just
go ahead.
Then I'd like to add to that. I think similar but very different to the comments before, because what was clear in the UCLA labor study, what all the research shows, is that there's been a very small, once it's been finally determined by the labor commissioner that money is owed, the UCLA labor report showed that only through that period, only 17% of the money that was actually owed was ever paid. And part of the problem, and I think there's underlying to this as well, is a lot of those businesses are out of business, have changed corporate forms, don't have any ability to pay, leaving the employee whose wages were stolen with a right, but absolutely no remedy. And I think your bill is a great step in that direction. But I'm also concerned that at that point where we're so far down the line that there's nothing left. And that was the theory. The theory with the prejudgment lien was to be able to hold on to some sort of value temporarily as it moved through the process, so that at the end of the process, once it's all settled, there's something out of which to ensure that the claim is paid. And as we deal with only post-judgment, a lot of time has passed, and there's not often much left. And I know there's other mechanisms in your bill to try and address that, but that's kind of a little different, coming at it a little bit differently, different concern, but the same kind of issue is once we're at the end and that business has failed or is failing, there's not, we're asking a lot of that business or those individuals at that point that may not necessarily be there. So if you could, I think that's the questions, address that in your close.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Stone, as well as colleagues, Ms. Garcia, as well as Mr. Vice Chair, for the concerns with regards, I think, specifically to the bond itself. As Mr. Stone just alluded to specifically, obviously, after adjudication, only 17% of these workers who have lost their wages, many of them our constituents, many of them who are here today, will actually even see any money in their pockets. I want to put this in context because it deserves to sort of be described a little more in detail. Oftentimes, these are among the lowest workers we have in the state of California who do some of the most hard, backbreaking work, and oftentimes when they don't have the wages that are lawfully owed to them, they sometimes have to find some type of public services to survive, to take care of the kids, to pay for the rent, to put the food on the table. And I want to give a lot of credit to the men and women who are here today, the security guards as well as the janitors who are all here today. Many of them really stretched during the course of the stakeholder meetings. Oftentimes that was not the case in years previous. There was a little more lockdown with regards to the perspectives on both sides, on both the chamber as well as the stakeholder employer side, the employee side, I should say. To the Chamber of Commerce, who are here today, as well as some of the other groups, I want to give them credit as well too. They themselves have stretched also too, to try to find a middle ground. And what was underscored today were the three components. Obviously, the issue with regards to focusing on the bad actors, but more specifically the $150,000 and dealing with surety bond businesses that are stating right now that it'll be very difficult to supply them or to actually provide the bond after a stop order. The issue of the personal liability at the lowest level, and obviously the question of joint liability. These are three issues right now that we are still working out right now. As we speak, stakeholders have really stretched on both sides. It's going to be difficult for me to sort of project to you what the conclusion will be at the end of the day, because these are ongoing negotiations that are both dynamic and fluid at the moment. However, I am taking into consideration, obviously, your perspectives, but we can't lose sight of the end goal. The end goal is to make sure when these workers are wronged, that after the adjudication, that they will actually be paid. 17% is an abysmal, horrific rate right now. So we have a little more work to do, unquestionably, with regards to the issue of the bond, because we don't want some of the unintended consequences at the end of the day, finding out that actually after you have, been ruled, after the Labor Commission has ruled against you and you owe the workers, that in fact you're not able to secure the bond itself. So there's some technical aspects that we still have to work on, no question about it. We're looking forward to the continued dialogue. It has been tough at times. They have stretched at times. It has not been easy, by no stretch of the imagination. None of this is easy, because if it was easy, then we'd have had this done a long time ago. But I can say that we're still working on the technical aspects with regards to the bond. And Mr. Stone, the prejudgment, concept, I understand it completely, 100%. I was a supporter of it, last year, because we want to make sure that there's something that's left after the fact, so that they can collect their judgment, as opposed to businesses that disappear like ghost businesses and then reappear overnight somewhere else. New title, new business permits, same boss, same owner, different workers. And then they continuously do the same thing, and they end up elsewhere. This is very pervasive, obviously, in the car wash industry, other types of restaurants that exist throughout the state of California. So we will continue to work on these aspects right now, but I just want to also say this is also a window of a lot of compromise on both sides coming to the table, and especially to the men and women who made it, lost the day of wages to come up here. They're owed a lot of debt of gratitude for really stretching on this issue. And with that, I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. So the motion is due pass to appropriation. Call the roll, please.
Stone?
Aye.
Stone, aye. Wagner? Wagner, no. Alejo? Alejo, aye. Chow? Chow, aye. Chu? Chu, aye. Gallagher? Garcia? Garcia, aye. Weber? Weber, aye. Mainshine? Thurman?
Has 6 votes.
Thank
So
you,
you're
Mr. Chair.
out.
Thank you.
Thank you.